Hello, everyone. Welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Now, this is the last video for the Brawlers guide. We are taking a look at the Brawlers tactics. What you want to do when you're on the battlefield, engaging in combat with whatever opponents may be being thrown at you by the DM. So, let's go ahead and just get started right on with this. To begin with, you are a lightly armored tank. You're less glass cannon than the monk is, so you have less reason to be skittish. So get into the thick of things. Lay into your opponents with your fists, and if that proves to be ineffective, draw out those punching daggers and just go to town overcoming damage reduction. Also, martial flexibility is going to be your bread and butter, obviously. Having your feat plans in mind ahead of time for different situations that can come up will be huge, and that tactical flexibility will make you incredibly useful and ultimately indispensable in a fight. And having things planned out ahead of time will just be a general time saver as well. So that way, when the DM comes to you and goes, okay, what are you doing this turn? If you just already know, it's like, bam, I'm using martial flexibility, I'm taking these feats, and I'm going to go into it. That will be a huge time saver and not just sync everything. Although that does require that you be able to look at this if you have a map with different miniatures, that'll help you visualize and plan things out, or just rely on your DM's description and be a little bit flexible. And DMs, be flexible working with your players a little bit too. Do your best to try to accurately describe the situation for them if you don't have the map and battlefield laid out with little minis. So that way they know which feats are going to be the most effective for them in a fight. Or rather, they're going to be able to better assess which ones are going to be effective. Also, speaking of martial flexibility, try and activate it before you get into the melee. It lasts a minute, so that's going to be more than enough time, and it's going to be incredibly important at earlier levels where it's going to take up a whole move action in order for you to use it. So this will make sure that you can keep launching full attacks and keep your damage output at a maximum. That said, the best laid plans of mice and men, it's not always going to go that way. You may get ambushed, you may be caught unawares, surprised somehow, or a fight may just through the course of roleplay, your character is just thoroughly unprepared somehow for some reason. It happens. But ideally, activate your martial flexibility before getting into the fight. And also, at early levels, if you're fighting opponents with damage reduction, say werewolves, whether that's in which case this will be specifically silver, and other such examples might, they're escaping me at the moment, but there are alchemical items that can grant temporary treatments to your weapons that will be a huge help. Alchemical silver, for example, will treat your weapon like it's silver, so that way when you go to attack the werewolf, you'll bypass its damage reduction. Although this does assume that your pummeling style doesn't already help you overcome that somewhat. If it doesn't, or at least you're not doing enough damage, pulling out those Qatar and just beating the ever loving piss out of the werewolf will be useful, or will be viable and handy, and even more so using alchemical silver. Also, I would think it's not beyond the realm of possibility to have other similar alchemical items like that to help treat your weapons to overcome damage reduction. But again, that's kind of a house rule thing that I've thrown out there into my own games. Some DMs may be open to it, others may not be, so just ask your DM ahead of time. Also, I've mentioned this before, but make use of pummeling style to overcome damage reduction when applying these alchemical agents isn't viable for you. It just does so much, and especially when you get more and more attacks and you have more and more opportunity to just stack that damage all together, that does a lot to deal with problems. And again, by the time you're stacking more and more attacks together, you will be unlocking more of your own damage reduction bonuses, overcoming damage reduction and the like for the different effects that your character class brings to you. Also, when you're dealing with enemy spellcasters, tripping them and grappling them will be incredibly effective. And also, again, this is kind of a house rule, but I think it's one a lot of DMs would be open to. It's going to be incredibly difficult for a spellcaster to cast any spells when your hand is right there on their trachea. If you're crushing their throat, they can't exactly get the verbal components out for spells. Same thing if you're grappling their arms or tying up their hands somehow and you're slowly crushing the bones to pieces. I mean, I don't see many spellcasters pulling those spells off effectively. Maybe if they have some of the appropriate feats, but, that's a whole other thing entirely. I guess it's really not, but you get the idea. If you're strangling the life from a spellcaster, breaking their bones and the like, they are not going to as effectively and readily cast spells, and using metamagic feats means that those spells are requiring higher level spell slots anyways, which, if they're having to expend lower level spells in higher level spell slots, that's a win for you. That's fewer high level spells that they can throw at you. They still use magic, but you're forcing them to use lesser quality magic out of higher level spell slots. So take the win. Really, as from there though, the tactics that you are going to employ really just depend on what feats you're selecting for martial flexibility. If you're dealing with swarms of opponents, then going cleave and great cleave and possibly even further down that particular chain might be the best option, especially coupling it with power attack. If you're fighting against opponents in total darkness, or if you're blind, then having the blind fighting feat tree will also be incredibly useful in those moments. It really just depends on what the situation is at hand and what little feat tree builds and plan outs that you have figured out ahead of time. But that's where we're going to go ahead and call it for the next round of character guides. Please go down below, cast your votes for what class you'd like to see next. I'm certainly excited to be covering more classes and doing different builds. These videos have been a lot of fun, fairly enlightening, because it forces me to do further research on different classes, looking at a myriad of different kinds of build guides online, and throwing in my own 2 cents on top of everything. So go down and vote below. Also, YouTube will be popping up some videos here that you may also be enjoying if you've enjoyed today's video. In which case, also, go down and click the like button if you have. And if you've been enjoying content here overall, well then, why not go ahead and subscribe? Certainly, we'll be happy to have you here. But with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time. Have yourselves a good night, and we'll see you next time.